Greetings everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. If you are new to this channel, I'm Advocate Puleng. And if you haven't subscribed, please do consider to subscribe. In this channel, I teach South African law and we also discuss pearls of wisdom backed by the word of God, which is the Bible. Today I'm going to talk about the principle or the doctrine of legitimate expectation in South Africa. Now, what does this doctrine mean? What does this principle of legitimate expectation mean? This is, I quote, when there is a clear, unambiguous, unqualified assurance understood by those to whom it is given that a particular course of action will be taken or a particular procedure will be followed. This is according to Google. We're talking here about a clear. There must be a clear, it must be clear, it must be unambiguous. I guess it is to emphasize the fact that it has to be clear and it must be unqualified. What is this? There must be a clear assurance. It must not be ambiguous and it must be unqualified. This assurance that is given to an individual or to a set of people, they must have an understanding that there is a particular course of action that will be taken or that a particular procedure will be followed. Let me give an example. If you get employed at a certain sector, and let me just say for a disclaimer, this does not refer to any case that is going on in the country or in the media. It's just a teaching exercise to inform people. But the example of this legitimate expectation is, for example, if you are employed in a particular sector on a contract basis, and somewhere there's a message which is relayed or which is delivered that ultimately you will be employed permanently. And there is an assurance to that effect. It's clear, it's not ambiguous, it's not a maybe. You've been told that, okay, we are appointing you on a contract of 12 months, but after 1 year, we will employ you permanently. That is clear. That is not ambiguous. That is not qualified. It's unqualified in the sense that they don't say there must be this condition or whatever. It's just a promise that has been made to that effect, that you will be employed after 12 months. Another example is that of whereby you are acting in a position, maybe a senior position than the one that you are employed for. And there is a clear assurance which is unambiguous to the effect that at a later stage, you would be promoted to that position that you're acting on. It is clear, it's not ambiguous. So a legitimate expectation has been created because of that assurance. Now, one can ask, when can we say there is a legitimate expectation? When does it arise? When does a legitimate, at what stage does it arise? It can arise if there is an express promise. You see, it's very important that we focus on these words that have been used. Earlier on, we spoke about it must be clear, it must be unambiguous, it must be unqualified. And of course, it is an assurance that has been made to you. Now, we are saying it happens because there is an express promise which was given by a public authority. It's not just any other person. It must be a promise which is express and it's given by a public authority. It's given by somebody who has the authority to make that promise that is express. It must not just be one of the colleagues who would be saying to you, I think they are going to employ you permanently. I think that they are going to promote you. You see how you are acting. No, it must be somebody with the necessary authority who would then make that promise. Or there must be an existing regular practice. What do you mean by existing regular practice? It must be, as a way of example again, every time when a person acts, they ultimately get appointed to that position. It's a regular practice. Or going back to our first example, it must be every time in this company, there's a practice that they start by appointing people on a contract basis for 12 months, and at a later stage, they get employed permanently. This is, of course, an example. So it's not just an express promise, but it's an existence of a regular practice, which the person can reasonably expect to continue. Because if we all know that this is how people get appointed permanently in this company, they first start by being contract employees for 12 months, and at a later stage, they get appointed permanently. Why should it now all of a sudden change when it comes to you? It is a regular practice. So that is why we can safely say there was an assumption on your part that this will also happen to you. So, besides it being an express promise, it is a regular practice in this company. So, this expectation that an individual has, it must be reasonable. Because you can imagine if we are going to run company based on expectations, how many are we going to meet and how many are we not going to meet? So in other words, it must be a reasonable expectation. Now, for us to say it is a reasonable expectation that a person has, it must be because there is good ground, there is a valid ground for this particular person to think that even in my situation, it will be done. Because after all, there was an express promise. After all, it's a practice which is regular in this company. So there's a good ground. That is why we talk about the fact that it is a reasonable expectation. So this person must have a good ground to think that it can be done, or to think that it ought to be done, or to think that it will be done. There's a good ground. If I were to give an example, people were employed because there's a shortage. And there is still a shortage of employees. There is still a shortage of skill, of that particular skill in the company. So why would they not employ me if there is still a shortage, if I can still see that they still need my services, except for the fact that there was an express promise, except for the fact that it is a regular practice. Now, the only exception would be if there are compelling or good reasons of public interest for that not happening. For example, let's go back to our example of you being promised a job, a permanent position after 12 months. What can be a good reason for public interest or based on public interest for not allowing it to happen? It may be at a time when you were appointed on a contract basis, there was money, but at the time when they're supposed to confirm the contract, there is no money any longer. It's just my example. But there should be a good reason for public interest, or that caters, or that is in line with public interest for not allowing it to happen. That could be the only exception. But once there is a clear, unambiguous, unqualified, express promise, regular practice in the company, this all creates a reasonable expectation, which now must be complied with. So, what does this mean for an ordinary person like you and I? It means that companies cannot just willy nilly make promises and not comply just because maybe they can say, there's nothing in writing, there's no contract. But what about the impression? What about the regular practice? Actually, let me not talk about it. What about the clear assurance that you made? You did make it. Why did you say it in the first place? Why did you create that impression that you are going to appoint this person permanently? So the law does intervene in situations like this. And that's as far as I can go with this principle of legitimate expectation, which has been created, whereby there is an obligation by those who create a legitimate expectation, who had the necessary authority to do it, public authority, as I said. And I also mentioned that it can't just be anybody making those assurances. It must be somebody with the necessary authority. I hope this helps a lot because, I know that there are some people who have been promised stuff and at a later stage, the authorities do not deliver. I thank you.